We are here with our most recent exciting episode of Project 42, and we have a very special guest with us today. His name is Mark H. Cohen, and he is going to be talking to us about some of his history with nonprofits and some of the issues that we like to talk about. And also we're going to talk about his most current experience, which is with a Chicago organization that is facing a number of issues on several different fronts, and I will let him tell those stories. So, Derek, if you would like to introduce our guest.
Yes, our guest Mark has an immaculate CV. Mark is a seasoned digital marketing expert and currently serves as the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Mezzero, correct? Mezzero. His career spans over 30 years, during which he's been at the forefront of digital transformation, driving strategic marketing initiatives and innovative digital solutions. Mark's journey began in traditional advertising, eventually pioneering digital marketing efforts, including the first web marketing class in NYU, which I think is awesome.
Isn't that cool?
It's awesome. And the first concert broadcast online. He has held significant roles at various organizations, including Food Chain ID and Cambridge Investment Research, and has a strong background in integrating digital strategies across multiple platforms. And as we are here, he currently serves as the Secretary of Board of Directors for Resilience. So I think a great place to start is, how'd you get into marketing?
Well, I am one of those rare people who has a marketing degree. And when I got out of school, I decided not to go for my MBA. And in those days, in New York, you had to have an MBA to be in marketing. But I decided I couldn't stay in school any longer.
Yeah.
So I kept trying to find jobs, and it was always, sorry, kid, you don't have an MBA.
Right.
So I finally found this ad agency where they had a mailroom position open. And so I thought, okay, I could do that. If that's what it takes, I will work my way out of the mailroom. And so I literally, the Horatio Alger story started on Madison Avenue in an ad agency in the mailroom. Awesome. And within 2 years, I was an account executive out there calling on some of the biggest companies in New York, trying to get their business and manage it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You had, I think a good way to frame the start of our conversation is you have a couple publications. The one that I was just, me being what I do for a living, what I was just most grabbed by was why marketing is a must-have for small business growth. Anybody that's grown a small business will know that marketing is a must-have. But I think I want to start our conversation off today with talking about marketing. You're a marketing expert, marketing pro, vet of a vet. What's the relationship between marketing and nonprofits, as you see it?
That's a great question. So, as far as the way that I look at the world, which is probably different than others, is that marketing and nonprofits isn't really much different than marketing and for-profit businesses. At the end of the day, we're trying to achieve some of the same objectives. First of all, we need to generate awareness, right? Nobody knew who Nike was until Nike started running incredible commercials. I mean, if you saw the movie, they went through the whole thing, right? I mean, yeah, they needed Michael Jordan too, but Michael Jordan and incredible commercials put Nike on the map. Even if they had Michael Jordan, but they never advertised it, no one would know who Nike was. So now look at a nonprofit. Why wouldn't a nonprofit think the same way? They don't have to have a superstar. But what they have to do is they need to take their mission and their value proposition, and they need to make people aware of it. And they need to make sure that they find the right people. Targeted marketing.
Right.
The same thing that any major corporation does, whether it's a B2B company or a B2C company like a Nike. Although in Nike's case, they targeted kind of high performing athletes. And at the time, no one was doing that. So another brilliant stroke of marketing, but for example, at Resilience, why wouldn't we be targeting people who are tied into our mission? Now, it's a lot harder to find sexual abuse survivors than it is to find high-profile athletes. So it's definitely a higher, it's a bigger task than, and a little more.
You mean like high-profile people that are out as survivors?
So no, I'm sorry. I'm rambling a little bit. No, so like for us, what marketing is really mostly about is about fundraising.
Right.
Right. And so if I want to find the right people who would really buy into our organization, and all I need to do is create awareness of who we are and what our mission is.
Right.
We need to find people who somehow have a history of they have to either be a survivor or know a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's everybody. When people say to me, I don't know anybody that's happened to, I say, do you know 3 people? It was interesting because you kind of rephrased it, but you said that's harder. It's harder to find, which, it's harder is more accurate than, it's a harder job, not harder to find the people, because there's 42 million survivors of childhood sexual abuse in this country. But it is a bigger task to find them than it is the high-profile athletes. Absolutely. Because it's anyone's comfortable talking about sports. It's a whole different conversation when you're trying to talk about childhood sexual abuse, and you know that as well as I do. And now that I've said this, I'm going to ask the question I've been dying to ask, which is, okay, I couldn't Google you very well this morning. There's too many Mark Cohens. But I know that you have been involved with a number of nonprofits, and they've all been larger nonprofits, nonprofits and missions that people have actually heard of. So you're new to this mission, am I correct?
Yes, I am.
Did something, and again, you don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk to, but obviously something drew you into this mission. It's smaller, it's less talked about, and it's kind of a step in a different direction for you. So anything you want to say?
Sure.
How is it the same and how is it different from other nonprofit areas you've worked in?
Yeah, those are great questions, Gene. So number one, what attracted me to the mission is the fact that my wife and one of my daughters are survivors.
So sorry.
Thank you. And I've not been afforded the opportunity to be able to do anything, I guess, I was going to say in their honor, but it really isn't so much about that as it is to help to stop that from happening to other people. Mm-hmm. I just, these 2 people who I love so much had it happen to them, and I could see how it's affected their lives, and it's still incredibly painful for them and for the entire family. Mm-hmm. So what could I do to help? And this came across my desk, and it was just a great match for me. Mm-hmm.
Were you already in Chicago?
I was in Chicago. When I left, I lived in this tiny town in Iowa called Fairfield, Iowa, which you raise your eyebrows.
I lived in a town in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I raised my eyebrows.
Well, we got confused with Fairfield, Connecticut. And so in Fairfield, Iowa, though, it's the home of the Transcendental Meditation movement.
Okay.
And so it's this incredibly cool little funky town in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, full of aging hippies. Yeah. And there's a lot of arts and food. And it's a really, really cool place. But anyway, when we moved away from there, I stopped my volunteer work and my board work, and I wanted to start to get involved in the Chicago community. So when I came here, I gave myself some time to decompress and also look for a new career. And once I had that all in place, then I opened my mind and my time and my pocketbook to find at least another nonprofit to be involved with. Truth be told, my dream, because I live near the Brookfield Zoo, is that I wanted to be on the zoo board. Mm-hmm. But I tried to network in. I'm not a big enough check writer, I think, for the Brookfield Zoo board. So then I started looking elsewhere, and I'm really happy to have found Resilience, because obviously much different mission, and one that, my gosh, there's just so much help that's needed for Resilience and anyone else involved.
And how long ago was this?
It was only 2 years.
Okay. So you stepped into a very interesting situation. As I've mentioned on previous podcasts, Resilience is one of the organizations that I support and have been involved with over the years. So I know a lot of background here. I don't think the big staff change, You got here maybe just before the big staff changes started happening, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, because I know they lost their ED. Their ED went somewhere else. The director of development followed closely afterwards. And then I kind of lost touch for a while, but my impression was, and then basically everybody. So you are in the position now of having to work with and lead in some cases, lead with whatever team, the board and everybody has been able to develop. And you're leading an organization through not only a period of staff turnover and upheaval, but, budget cuts and everything. If there's anything that hasn't been thrown at you in the past 2 years, I don't know what it could be. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you today is, what's it like?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate in that I've done this twice before.
Oh, okay.
And the first time I was asked by a friend, well, someone who I met in a leadership class. I was in something called Leadership Denver. And I met someone who was there were a lot of nonprofits involved with it. There was an executive director who convinced me to become her board chair. I had never even been on a board before. But she begged me to be her board chair. So, I quickly bought a Robert's Rules and started to figure out what the heck it meant to be a board chair. I joined the board, and within months, she left. So I know what that's like. Fast forward.
Sounds like my first full-time job. The guy who hired me was gone before I started.
Oh my gosh. So fast forward, and one of the organizations that I served on in the town of Fairfield was the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center,
okay.
Which was really kind of the heart of our town. Large event center. We actually had a theater named after Stephen Sondheim, only one of 3 theaters in the world in Fairfield, Iowa. We had to raise $300,000 a year to break even in a town of 10,000 people. Yeah. And so when I joined the board, we had a fairly good ED, no fundraising. That was when I helped to start a fundraising committee, which my wife actually ended up running because we're in a small town and she had experience. But fast forward, and we ended up having everything that could possibly happen to a nonprofit that was negative happened to us. And before I left, I had to make sure that we fired our ED because he had done some things that were unsavory. And we heard some other rumors about him that we didn't like as a board. And frankly, keeping him in place would have stunting the growth of the organization. So with all that, with these 2 different experiences, and the last one was years of this, it's actually not as rough as it is, I think, on the rest of the board. And it's actually, I think, very fortunate, not to suggest that I'm any kind of a savior or a superhero, but I think it's fortunate for the board to have me as a calming influence because I have been through this. I know what it takes to get through this. I know what we can do. And I mean, oh my gosh, we're named resilience, right? So, that's about...
Only in the past 5 or 6 years.
True.
I went through the name change.
You did. I know a lot of people don't like it. Personally, as a marketer...
I can see both sides.
Yeah, I can see both sides actually also. But as a marketer, I appreciate it. I think it says a lot. It says a lot about the people who we serve. And I do think, now it's going to say a lot about the organization.
Okay. Well, I really only mentioned two of your struggles, the staff change and funding problems. Actually, there's a third one, and I want to tiptoe up to that subject, which is what I have observed maybe is starting to happen and desperately needs to happen, is a real culture shift at that organization. I've been working with that organization for over 20 years. So, if attention is if they've got someone like you and attention is starting to be paid to fundraising and marketing, then I can tell you it's a very different organization than I have ever worked with. So, without naming names and getting us all into trouble.
No, let's not do that.
Could you talk, I perceive that a culture shift might be starting to happen. I think it's very necessary for it to happen. So tell me what you tell me your thoughts on that
Sure,
same subject.
sure. I agree with you. I think I would be a little softer in my assessment of the prior regime. There was marketing and there was fundraising. However, as you and I were discussing previously, Derek, it was more along the lines of not as focused as it should have been, not as directed as it should have been by the ED and possibly even by the board. So it just wasn't as effective as it could be. And now with those people gone, and Gene mentioned this is where it's really uncovering a lot of even the most basic processes and systems that hadn't really been put into place. So we have to rebuild all that. But that all starts at the top. And so we've been very fortunate to find an executive director who's highly experienced. She has experience with our mission, and she has vision and energy and is not afraid to make change, which has included personnel changes. Every organization has got personnel who are...
She had to hire like 6 people, and she had to hire 6 people.
She did. And there were people who didn't like her vision.
Right.
And who actually have been very, very important members of the organization.
Oh, yeah.
But you know how it is, change is hard. And so unfortunately we had to part ways with some of those people as well. So now that means more hiring. So what's been really tough for the ED is that she's just been treading water, absolutely treading water. But now with this new team in place, I didn't vet any of them, but I have met most of the new team. I haven't met the new marketing communications manager, but I've met the rest of them. And you met one yourself.
Only over the phone.
No, true, but so far so good, right? I think that
she was impressive, but she was only just starting.
Sure.
But I did that did give me a sense of the larger. I'm just going to say turmoil. You might not like that word, but she was very transparent with me, which was very important for me. And that was when I got a sense that things were there was more upheaval than I had thought.
Yeah, things definitely...
You didn't just lose your ED, in other words.
No, we didn't. And and things were tumultuous. There's no doubt. I would say though that since the new ED has joined, things are starting to become steadier. As the new staff gets ramped up, as we deal with some of the other personnel issues not associated with her management team, she's now going to be able to focus more on the bigger issues at hand. Fundraising being at the top of the list, and marketing being right along with it, because let's face it, those two have got to live in tandem. You really cannot do one without the other. Fundraising is all that we can do right now until we have some sort of additional revenue generating programs. That's what we have to do, because as you mentioned, Gene, there are huge budget cuts at the federal and state level. So we've got to be able to deal with those shortfalls. So you need fundraising, and then of course we need marketing so that more people can know about us, and not only donors but survivors.
Well, this is why I asked the question about culture, because as you said, fundraising, marketing have to go together. There have been, I guess people would consider them unprecedented budget cuts, have come to our attention. In my mind, having worked this mission for 25, 30 years, it's nothing new. And it shouldn't even be surprising anyone. This is my personal belief, and it's not based on any really quotable data. But I don't think VOCA funding is even going to be here in 10 years. And if it is, it's going to be drastically reduced. And what the shift that needs to happen, and this isn't just one organization, this is everybody. There has to be an entire groundbreaking shift in how people think about revenues, because it can't just be all about fighting for the diminishing pool of government funding anymore. You've got to start looking at individuals. You've got to start looking at corporations. You've got to start looking at small foundations. And these are not easy. I ran a nonprofit. I hated fundraising as much as everybody else did. I know of which I speak. These are not easy things to do. It requires different skills. No one likes writing grants, but it's kind of cut and dried. You sit down, you spend 3 hours, and you've got a grant proposal. That's not how you solicit a donor. That's not how you get inside the door of a corporation. It's not even how some small foundations are easier than others, and that's what I don't see happening anywhere. I know of one organization that, and you know them too, where I think that the ideas are not as foreign as in most ICASA organizations, but they're still not really addressing it to the extent they are. So, first of all, if you think I'm full of crap, it's okay for you to say that. But this is what I need to see happening. Do you see it beginning? Do you feel that you've got the team in place that can at least even admit and address that this is the way we need to go?
Absolutely. I hope that at some point, excuse me, sometime soon, that you'll get to meet with our new executive director. She absolutely has vision related to that, related to revenue generation, not just fundraising, revenue generation. Nonprofits need to have revenue generating programs.
And no one makes it easy for them.
No, it's not easy. I mean, I was consulting for a while when I was back in Fairfield, Iowa, and I actually consulted for 2 Iowa town departments of public health. Not unlike us, you're talking about organizations that have very little funding from the federal government, and in Iowa, unfortunately, definitely not from the state government. They don't even believe in science. So here are these organizations where they're struggling for money to keep their citizens healthy. They can't even run like diabetes clinics, which is the #1 killer of people 65 plus. They can't even, can barely have the funds to run those clinics, no less, my gosh, what happened with COVID. So one of the things that I got them to think about was revenue generation. What can we do? What innovative things can we do that are still within your charter that can help you to raise money without putting too much of a burden on the community, because they're there to serve the community, right? I mean, they have to serve everyone. It's the Department of Public Health. So anyway, that kind of thinking is absolutely present in our executive director, and she admits, and I must tell you, we've had some painful emails where I've probably said some things that I've said some things that have upset her, because I'm here for a reason, right? I'm on this board for a reason, and I've seen what I felt were deficiencies in fundraising and marketing as well, and her responses have been, regardless of whether she was upset with me or not, have been very positive, and I think, are very hopeful for me in terms of the way she wants to lead. And then knowing, for example, our new, I will call her a director of advancent.
Yeah,
Jean,
never mind.
That's the title.
I'm a writer. You never win word battles with writers.
No, you don't. So our new director of advancement, I actually worked closely with her before she even got the position, and she is impressive. Okay. She is a dynamo. So between her and the person who you met, they're the team now. Yeah. With the new executive director, and we'll be forming a fundraising committee for the board so that the board can now become more involved, because what board is a good fundraising board other than the biggest nonprofits in the country? I mean, I've never found many people who want to be involved with fundraising.
No, yours truly is one of them. I sit back now and criticize people, but I had to do it. I didn't like it. Well, I've been grilling this poor man, Derek, on some of the cultural and staff issues. So I will leave it up to you to start the conversation with him about marketing, the importance of marketing and social media to a nonprofit.
Now that we have him here
and diversify their revenue sources.
Now that we have him here, I'm going to try to squeeze some free consulting hours out of him. Sonic branding. What's old is new again. Written by Mark Cohen.
Who's that guy?
So, fascinating article. You started talking about the sound as it relates to brands. Iconic NBC chimes, the sound of an Apple MacBook booting up, the sound of the Netflix when you open the app. and then a little bit.
Doo-doo, that one?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
A little bit.
Or Law and
then-
Order.
As I quote from our esteemed guest, the latest example of sonic branding that interests me, and not unlike what I've written above, is old and new again. Podcasting. Here we are. So I'm not screaming into the void. It does make sense. Podcasting do make sense.
It does, but you know what's so funny about it? Oh, go ahead, though.
No, go ahead.
What's so funny about it, and I think I wrote about this there, is that, as you may know,
Yep.
podcasting started at the dawn of the internet.
Right.
This is not a new idea, which it just blows my mind. You know, Audible, it was literally Audible. I think it was even called Audible. Back in like 1997,
Right.
they created this thing called podcasting. And people just scratched their heads. You know, and you know, there's always been this thing, and you know this, Derek, about anything that you do on the web is about content. Content is king was something that was shared in back in the day, right?
We said that from 20 minutes ago. Content is king.
Yeah, content is king, and the problem was they had this thing called podcasting, but it was filled with what? There's no good content.
Crap.
Right, it was crap. But you know, bully for them that they've been able to stick around and now help to fuel this generation of people who, oh my gosh, the amount of podcasts that are being created and being listened to and being supported by advertising is just blowing my mind.
Yep. So yeah, we want to get after.
So that's why you said yes.
You know, like we were just talking a little bit ago about how vital and critical it is to get Gen Z involved in what your mission area is, because they, you know, there's a lot of people that aren't Gen Z that have a lot of resources and influence and power, but in terms of the digital space, if you've got their eyes, if you got their attention, you have a lot you can leverage in a lot of different ways. And one of our earlier podcasts, we had our friend Lyndon on, and Lyndon was the brains behind the Truth campaign in the 90s. Stop quitting smoking.
Use the last name here, Lyndon Haviland.
Lyndon Haviland. And she's a dynamite person. She's got like an 800 IQ.
And she really likes Derek.
I don't know why. But we were talking about that, and the whole idea of what's the national campaign equivalent for sexual assault, child sexual abuse. What does that look like? Like for you look at the Truth campaign or the breast cancer awareness campaigns, like there's all of these issues. People are so willing and gung-ho to get behind them, and we're doing a national campaign and it's going to target it. Like why don't we have that? How do we get it? What do you think about it?
Oh man, that is a big question, and I have thought a lot about. And actually, Gene and I chatted a little bit about
I think
this
about
by
it all the
phone.
time, especially now. You got me going.
You know, the biggest, I think our biggest problem is that survivors have survivor guilt, right? People are reticent to tell their stories. They don't
Well,
want
that's
to
not because the
admit.
survivors feel guilty. It's because they know what's going to happen to them when they start talking.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely.
I
right?
mean, that there's guilt too, but you know, they're going to be grilled, not believed, laughed at, called gay, whether they are or not.
Yeah, I mean, just the most horrible tropes. And so if people are reticent to admit it, even if all they do is to be able to say, yes, I'm a survivor, and maybe even to their family, right? Because as we know, there are many families where they don't even know that their mom or their dad or a brother or sister are actually survivors. So if that's the mentality, that everything is really still kind of kept secret,
Right.
it's going to be really hard to run a campaign that anyone is going to look at and say, oh yeah, I can relate to that, even though they can. So what do, right? I mean, education, which is also can be obviously very dry and not very exciting, education is so critically important to this. I mean, in the things that you've asked me to read, before I came. And actually, I'm sorry. In the podcast that I've listened to,
Yeah. I didn't ask you to read my books.
No. Sorry, I'm like,
That's okay. That's okay.
brain fart. So in the podcasts that Gene asked me to listen to, some of your earlier podcasts, you guys quoted a lot of stats.
Yeah.
And it's information, if people could start to really understand that it all starts with kids, right? And that if the abuse starts there, and doesn't stop, because as you guys know better than I do, that unfortunately it doesn't stop, because then it becomes, a cycle of abuse and violence that those kids unfortunately get pushed into by no fault of their own. If it all starts there, that's what we need to educate people about.
Right.
We need to connect those dots.
Right.
But we also need to do it in an incredibly creative and compelling way.
Right.
And you know what? It might actually be to scare the shit out of people.
Right.
And because unfortunately, that works. I mean, it's working right now for a whole political party.
Right.
So, look at what they're doing, which of course is, I don't want to get into politics, but, look at what they're doing, and it's actually been very, very effective.
Yeah, it's working.
They've got, millions of people who aren't even necessarily doing their own homework and educating themselves. They're listening to that message because they relate to it somehow.
Yeah.
Could I ask you a marketing question? And I'm going to write this down because I'm probably going to try to copy some of your homework. If I gave you $1 million budget to do a national campaign, I'm assuming you start off coming up with some really awesome, creative, content, and then what platform? You had to pick one. Are you putting all the advertising into social media? Are you trying to go old school with TV? How are you hitting them with email newsletters? Which, if you had to go after one, where are you going?
Great question. Let me, though, tell you that where I would start is by talking to survivors.
Okay.
Because without knowing what we should talk about that gets them to connect to it, so that they can talk about it, we're not gonna win. Right? We're not, and by win I mean we're not gonna create a message that
How soon can I introduce him to Scott, who's already done, Informing Braver Collective? It was survivor directed and led all the way to an astonishing degree.
I'd love to meet him.
And then
so now where am I going to spend my $1 million bucks, right?
10 million.
10 million. I can't pick one. There's no way that you can pick one, because nobody uses just one medium. And we know that in almost any industry, it takes 7 to 10 exposures to a message before anyone is affected. And nowadays, unfortunately, it's not 7 to 10 messages in the same medium. It's 7 to 10 messages across medium. Right. So you know what? I know there are going to be people who disagree with me. And look, I'm a digital guy, right? You know my background. And I'm primarily focused on digital right now. We have to use TV. But not only broadcast TV, we need to use streaming.
Absolutely.
It's got to be on the streaming platforms, got to be on TV, absolutely need to be in social media. And in social media...
Longer form content?
It's got to be longer form content. Absolutely needs, because again, it's got to be educational. And really, like I said, we've got to scare the shit out of people. And what I'm not sure of yet is, do we start at the end state, which is, hey, do you see that the prison is filled with, here's a prison. This prison is filled with 2,000 people. And guess what? 1,500 of them were abused as children.
Real quick, don't mean to cut you off.
Sure.
Back when our whole thing started, and Gene knows me, I'm a research nut, I'm pulling data, I'm in medical journals, all that stuff. I found a study that they did I can't remember the names of the people that did it. And it was conducted by Montclair University, New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
And they surveyed a male prison, and they were trying to report how many of them experienced sexual abuse. Not when they were in the prison, but before they got there. It was almost 70% of the prison population.
Not surprising. Not surprising.
And that's low.
Right? And so, you start with that, maybe you start with that story, and then you show the cost to society. The cost to them and the cost to society. Right? And now, hopefully, you're starting to raise the eyebrows of so many of the people who, for example, want to cut social programs. And here's the thing: if they want to cut social programs, then they need to support us,
Right.
Because if we could stop abuse of children, then they're not going to necessarily go on to a social program. But we know that, and we can prove that there's a clear path
Right.
between the abuse and what happens to the survivor later in life. Not everyone can go on the straight and narrow.
Oh, and that's kind of why we concentrated on numbers at the beginning with the first podcast, and maybe we overdid it just a bit. But you know, to me, that was the thing that addressed all the goals, the concerns you've mentioned. The number, 42 million, it should scare everybody. It should wake them up. It should make them think. It answers, it answers every objection to, well, I don't know, well, there's not that many, etc. So, I think the number, I think you have to start with the numbers, and until you get that in people's heads. I mean, I'd just love to do a man on the street thing, woman on the street.
Yep.
Whatever. Use whatever pronoun. Person on the street. And just say, how many sexual survivors of sexual abuse are there?
We're going to
in
do
the
that.
United States?
We're
Yeah, I
gonna
know
do
we're
that.
going to do
We're
that.
gonna do that.
You know, and then, of course, when somebody says, well, I don't know anybody, it's, 3 people.
Yep.
So, because I just, everybody, and I'm not saying the 42 million number is magical, but it's probably closer. It's probably closer than most of the underestimated numbers. And until, I think that's how, in my mind, that's how you start. Because when people get that, a lot of the other things will roll away. Well, you don't have to feel guilty about it. It happened to 41,990, people too, You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to talk about it yourself if you don't want to, because 1,000 of those 42 million are doing it for you. You can join in silent support. And this is also my way of kind of like wrapping things up for today, because Mark has been very generous with his time, and I hope he comes back. I hope we can spend more time talking about scale and digital marketing and how does it expand the reach, and what nonprofits are going to be doing it, and are any of them doing it already, and can we talk about that? So hopefully Mark will come back, or he'll introduce us to all his friends, and those people will help us talk about it. But we really, really appreciate Mark being here today. And of course, I appreciate, as always, Derek being here today. I appreciate the fact that Project 42 has a bit of a staff now. I appreciate the fact that Caitlin and Taylor are here today. I even appreciate the fact that my husband's sitting over there in that chair, because he doesn't usually watch the podcast. He's watching you, Mark.
And one day we're going to interview Sergio, who's our camera guy.
Oh yeah, like we'll ask him. We'll ask him how he liked the lasagna last month, and really important world-shaking questions like that. So again, Derek, please close by telling people where they can find us and what they can do to help us.
Yes, absolutely. So our new domain obviously is going to be p42.com. Our landing page is going to be up soon. We did a full rebrand, obviously, from the Shame on You, which from the marketing thing is kind of a little abrasive. little bit better marketing, and our socials are all going to be linked to the website, and we're going to have a lot of call to actions and ways you can get involved and to support us. So thank you very much.
And I don't think it's too soon to mention that there is going to be a fundraiser for Project 42 in mid-October, and we're already working and planning on that. Hope you'll be there. Help us spread the word.
Yep. Help us market
it. Just once again, thank you all for joining us today. Remember, 42 million. P42. Hashtag.